Today I want to talk about a piece of writerly advice you've probably heard before, and the way I sum it up is keep a list of cool things. And a list of cool things is, as the name implies, a list of things that you find interesting or compelling or nifty whenever you stumble across some factoid that you find fascinating or a compelling quote or a unique picture. You throw it into your cool things repository, and you maybe give it some kind of organizational tagging. And when you're low on inspiration or you're just bored, you can paw through it the way you would look through a closet for something to wear to a party, and you see what catches your attention. Now, why you want to maintain something like this has dimensions to it that I don't think get discussed enough. So I'm going to unpack some of those here. And not all of them are going to be obvious, because keeping a list of cool things is not just about having a pool of resources to draw on, to make stuff with. It's not just about having material to break up creative stagnation. It's also a way to cultivate a couple of creative processes that augment the actual making of things. When you gather stuff, you use the process of gathering stuff to teach yourself how and what to look for, where to find things, and how to regard them as stimulating. And by doing all that, you can learn a little bit more about yourself in the process, what you find interesting and why. What is it about some particular thing that makes you want to hang on to it and do something with it? And one of the most wonderful inventions that the modern writer is blessed with is the internet. And I'm going to set aside, for the sake of this argument, everything about social media being a cancer, how people would rather surf Wikipedia than actually do any writing if they have an excuse. Because despite all of those things, one of the best parts about having access to such a rich pool of stuff is that it helps you discover what truly interests you and why. You can discover not just the places where you can put your hand out and skim off trivia or little sparkly bits that intrigue you, but also all the places where you can really stick your hand down in deep and come up with great things. So one of the points of keeping a list of cool stuff is that it helps you discover what you really care about and why you care about it as deeply as you do. And this is something that I think only comes with time. That once you gathered a certain amount of stuff, you can start to look at it and say, what are the threads here? What are the consistent themes running through the things that I like to get my hands on and want to do things with? In my case, for instance, I'm very interested in history, but I'm not interested in it for having just a sake of a trove of facts. I'm interested in it because I want to see as many examples as I can possibly find of the way certain aspects of the world work. And one of those aspects that I'm most fascinated with is the way that we deal with explosive change when it manifests in society, not just when it's visited on us from the outside, but when it occurs spontaneously from within. So it's worth keeping a cool things list to make this whole process of gathering as much about the process of gathering, as much about what that process teaches you about yourself and your curiosities, as it about what you ultimately put any of this stuff to, what you ultimately use any of it for, how you look for things, and how you think about them, how you think about what you're looking for and why. Those become as important as where to look and what to use. And I'm big on this idea because I always felt the biggest reason to write anything fantastic, the biggest reason to write anything at all, really, was not just to have a book when you were finished. It was to have, through the process of creating that thing, a personal encounter with everything that the book touches on. And the more of this material you find you can have a deep personal encounter with, the deeper the process will get with each revision. And I've noticed that when I've gathered stuff for my own things in the past, when I've created my own cool repositories, I've noticed that there's a 90-10 effect, as I put it. 90% of what gets scooped up is going to be stuff that is interesting, but it's ultimately kind of trivial. If it does find its way into a piece of work, it gets used in a way that's basically cosmetic or superficial. It's fun, but it's not necessarily the heart of the material. It's not really transformative. And again, those things aren't bad. It's just important to know their place. But then there's that 10%. There's that stuff I was talking about before, the things you realize you really are interested in, not just because of what they are, but what they mean to you, how they help you build out a worldview and take that worldview and make a story grow from it. All that stuff I was talking about with history, for instance, about societies and circles of people, individuals, how they deal with explosive change from inside and outside, how people leap across the gap between the end of one way of life and beginning of another. That's one of my big, deep things. And what I'm saying with all this is By searching through all of this stuff and collecting it and collating it and tabulating it and reflecting on it, you owe it to yourself to find similar streams. You owe it to yourself to find similar threads, similar deep interests, and really dig into them. Now, with all this, the way that it relates to the making of science fiction and fantasy in particular, the word particular comes up here because all stories thrive on the particular. Science fiction and fantasy thrive doubly so on particular details, concrete things, things we feel like we could be sitting next to on the bus, as I like to put it. They make things feel lived in. They make things feel like they have depths that we're not necessarily going to see the whole of. There's a life to the story beyond the page, what some people call iceberg world building, I guess. And again, one of the best ways to develop that kind of lived-in feeling is by way of these kinds of harvested details. And the best kinds of those harvested details are things that have come from the real lived-in world. And how you pick up on those details, what you turn them into, is also super important. Some of you probably know that my day job is in writing about IT for business. And I do apply some of what I pick up in my day job to my fictional universes, but not in the sense that I write about things like rogue AIs or terrorists exploiting software bugs. There's a blog post I made a while back that has a quote worth chomping out here that describes nicely the way that I take these interests and I transform them. So a lot of what I take from my work is things like how we think social problems have absolute technological solutions, how all of these bleeding edge problems seem like they're just different weeds all springing from the same cracks in our society, how we've been conned into worshiping the wrong gods instead of understanding ourselves, how illusory power and sovereignty can never make up for real freedom. And these are all things that I've seen play out again and again in the world that I cover for work. And I try to take these dynamics that I've described, the mechanics of these things, not the exact absolute details, but the mechanisms. And I try to put some flavor of that into my work. I should also point out, there's nothing that says that a given detail can or should only work in a science fiction or fantasy setting. Let's say I come across something like a paper about a scientific discovery. The easy interpretation is there, well, this scientific discovery could be some useful piece of background or the basis to build a story around. But I'm also, I've noticed, been very curious about the way things like the researchers for the paper would debate their ideas, the way they would try to reframe their assumptions about things to make their discovery. That is at least as interesting to me. That is at least as much the substance of a story as the discovery itself. And examples of that kind of curiosity about the world feel like things that would be home in any fantastic setting. So I've skipped around a bit, but I'm going to try to sum up as succinctly as I can. You want to keep a list of cool things to fuel your work. And you want to use that list not just to harvest stuff to put into the work, but to help you discover what is really important to you, what matters, and why. You want to use it to distinguish between the stuff that's cool but superficial, which is most of what gets thrown in there, and a few but really deeply transformative things that really help you figure out the worldview that you want to put into your stuff. And those things really matter in stories about the fantastic because the surface details can come from anywhere, but the deeper stuff can only come from inside you, from your worldview, which you are going to enhance by going out and doing this kind of research and cultivation on all of these wonderfully specific details. So get out there and dig deep and see what you think.